Hi everyone. Today's latest update is breaking the internet because at 6 a.m. in the morning, what looked like another quiet royal headline detonated into something far bigger than gossip. Because synchronized moves from the Crown, legal authorities, and regulators across the Atlantic confirmed that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's Archewell Foundation was officially under full-scale investigation, and the speed of it all felt almost surgical. By mid-morning, the IRS had initiated a joint compliance review with California's Attorney General over suspected tax misclassification and alleged misuse of charitable deductions tied to streaming production expenses. And suddenly, this was not about podcasts or public image, but about filings, numbers, and whether charitable impact media had quietly overlapped with commercial entertainment in ways that raised serious red flags. Then the financial hammer dropped when Netflix terminated residual partnerships, citing material breach of contract, and demanded $20 million in reimbursement for unproduced content, reputational damage, and sunk costs, which instantly shifted the story from reputational tension to financial fallout. But the real tremor did not come from America. Before we move on, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, the next reveal changes everything. It came from Sandringham, where King Charles III, acting under advisement from the Lord Chancellor, issued an official institutional distancing order through Clarence House, revoking commercial references to royal styling, heritage, or ceremonial association connected to Archewell, and marking the first time in modern history that a reigning monarch authorized legal separation from a royal family member prior to formal court proceedings. And that move alone reframed everything, because this was no longer narrative warfare, it was enforceable structure. Within hours, the consequences became visible as Buckingham Palace updated its official website, removing the Duke and Duchess of Sussex from active listings and archiving them under historical royal engagements from 2018 to 2020, which felt less like an edit and more like a message. Then Prince William issued an emergency directive from Kensington Palace, making it clear that no royal office, representative, or charitable affiliate maintained correspondence or collaboration with organizations trading on expired royal proximity under misleading pretenses. And the tone was unmistakable. This was not nostalgia. This was containment. Princess Anne stepped forward in a rare live address from the Royal Charities Trust headquarters, declaring the termination of all present and future cooperation with any entity associated with Archewell, emphasizing that this was procedural, not personal, and reinforcing that royal identity is not a license, but a legacy. And the phrasing cut deep because it suggested standards had been crossed. As the day unfolded, a leaked internal bulletin from the UK Charity Commission confirmed Archewell had been flagged for irregularities tied to a 2025 Youth Media Grant initiative in Southern Africa, where footage surfaced showing children filmed under banners bearing Princess Diana's silhouette alongside the phrase, "A Mother's Crown." The imagery that investigators confirmed was a registered mark under Royal Heritage licensing and had never been approved for use by Archewell, which escalated the matter from branding confusion to alleged symbolic misuse. And that distinction changed the temperature entirely. Regulatory experts describe the Foundation's recent stealth name change and partial dormancy filing in California as a classic risk avoidance pattern, not illegal by default, but suspicious when combined with discrepancies. And the implication was clear. Someone anticipated impact before impact arrived. Meghan Markle's legal team responded with a 12-page rebuttal signed by her U.S. attorney, Elena Fitz, calling the accusations defamatory, weaponized, and institutionally motivated, while placing blame on Netflix and the British monarchy, and framing the backlash as a coordinated reputational takedown. Yet even as that defense circulated, Prince Harry's silence grew louder because his name did not appear prominently in the rebuttal, and sources suggested he had not signed off on the tone or strategy, which introduced a fractured narrative that felt more destabilizing than any audit. Public reaction intensified as hashtags surged, and commentators labeled the distancing order the most direct institutional rebuke since the abdication crisis. And by evening, analysts described the coordinated moves by King Charles, Prince William, and Princess Anne as soft constitutional enforcement, where precedent becomes practice through unified action. And what struck me most was not the noise, but the choreography, because every statement, every website update, every regulatory escalation appeared timed, creating the sense of a system closing ranks rather than reacting emotionally. And by the time the first 24 hours ended, the question was no longer whether this was a family dispute, but whether Archewell, as a brand built on proximity to the crown, could survive a legal and symbolic firewall that was clearly designed to be impermeable. And this was only the beginning, because as the investigations widened and international institutions began reviewing styling privileges across Commonwealth realms, the ground beneath the Sussex identity continued to shift, and what happened next would push this story from controversy into constitutional territory. By the next morning, the situation had evolved from regulatory pressure into something that felt global, because what started in California was now echoing through Clarence House, the Privy Council, and across the Commonwealth, as senior legal officers from the Crown Estate, Royal Communications Office, and Foreign Office liaisons gathered to confront a question that once would have seemed unthinkable: whether the styling Her Royal Highness connected to Meghan Markle still carried any practical standing in international protocol. Insiders made it clear this was no longer about courtesy, but clarity, and that distinction mattered, because ambiguity in royal identity can create leverage, and leverage can create profit. At the same time, UK regulators accelerated their own reviews as the Advertising Standards Authority launched a compliance examination into Archewell-linked products, while Ofcom opened a formal investigation into past podcast episodes that may have implied royal endorsement in ways that blurred institutional lines. And the UK Charity Commission elevated previous internal flags into an active compliance investigation, focusing particularly on grant expenditures tied to media initiatives abroad. The pace was relentless, and it was impossible to ignore the feeling that multiple doors were closing at once. Across the Atlantic, Meghan Markle made a calculated move, posting a blog entry titled "More Than a Name." They spoke about identity under surveillance and being erased by institutions resistant to reinvention. And while the tone projected defiance, it also amplified the perception of confrontation rather than conciliation. Noticeably, Prince Harry did not appear in the messaging, nor was he reportedly present at Archewell's offices that day, which fueled speculation that strategic unity inside the Sussex camp was beginning to thin. Royal insiders suggested Harry had not approved the February rebuttal language and had remained detached from the immediate media counterattack. And when silence stretches during crisis, it often speaks louder than statements. Back in the United Kingdom, Princess Catherine delivered a brief remark in a private charity engagement, saying, "Dignity is not something we publish, it is something we protect." And those few words spread rapidly, reinforcing the palace's positioning of restraint over reaction. And inside royal corridors, the tone sharpened further as Prince William chaired crisis discussions with members of the Royal Oversight Committee, emphasizing brand containment and institutional sovereignty, signaling that this was no longer about headlines, but about structural preservation. Then the narrative intensified with the leak of a sealed internal file titled Operation Sovereign Filter, outlining a sweeping digital and legal initiative to erase any false continuity between Archewell and the monarchy, including directives that future SEO metadata, branded content, and campaign language avoid referencing royal alignment. And by midday, Buckingham Palace had completed a full sweep of its official website, archiving Meghan Markle's biography under historical engagements and transforming what had once been present-tense royalty into past-tense association, which felt less like editing and more like erasure through procedure. The most explosive revelation followed when a confidential ethics review uncovered discrepancies in the Windsor Legacy Project, showing children featured beneath banners emblazoned with Princess Diana's silhouette and the phrase, "a mother's crown," imagery protected under the Sovereign Image and Integrity Act, passed in 2024, to prevent unauthorized commercial use of deceased royals' likenesses. And the allegation that this symbolism had been intertwined with monetized streaming content sent shockwaves because it suggested the merging of emotional legacy with profit-driven narrative, and that combination rarely lands softly. Emergency sessions convened as Prince William met with senior representatives from the Royal Foundation, the UK Treasury's Charity Fraud Division, and external counsel, declaring that moral capital would not be leveraged as clickbait, while Princess Anne issued a formal letter of disassociation, asserting that the Crown would not lend its name, heritage, or goodwill to any entity that misrepresented intent or manipulated public trust. The directives grew more concrete when Clarence House released a legal document demanding immediate cessation of the terms Royal Windsor and Duchess of Sussex in promotional material, removal of imagery referencing Queen Elizabeth II, Princess Diana, King Charles III, or any serving royal without written authorization, termination of partnerships claiming royal endorsement, and compliance within 14 days to avoid formal litigation under the Crown Institutions Act of 2022. And the language left little room for interpretation because it introduced asset freeze petitions, civil injunctions, and coordinated notices to international platforms as potential consequences. Polling data soon revealed that a significant majority of UK respondents supported the monarchy's actions, while sympathy for Meghan Markle's framing remained limited domestically, although American sentiment appeared more divided. Yet financial experts noted that Archewell-affiliated accounts were being flagged for auditing by California's Registry of Charitable Trusts, adding further weight to the expanding scrutiny. And amid all of this, whispers emerged that Prince Harry was emotionally and strategically in retreat, with reports suggesting he was seeking clarity on how his children's legacy could be protected independently of Archewell. And that subtle shift from defense to separation hinted at a deeper recalibration taking place behind closed doors. As evening approached, cameras captured Princess Catherine arriving at St. James's Palace for meetings with Crown legal advisors, responding to questions only with the phrase, "Silence does not mean absence. It means we are building something stronger." And the symbolism was unmistakable, because while one side amplified confrontation, the other projected construction. And by the close of that second day, it was clear this was no temporary storm, but an institutional reset unfolding in real time. And the next development would raise the stakes beyond public messaging into formal diplomatic territory. By February 24th, the atmosphere no longer felt like damage control. It felt like a coordinated international recalibration. Because Buckingham Palace circulated a classified memo titled Operation Final Distance, outlining a strategy to enforce complete disassociation from the Sussex brand across royal and semi-royal registers throughout the Commonwealth. And this was not framed as public relations, but as legal architecture. One of the core clauses suspended commercial and diplomatic references to the titles Duke and Duchess of Sussex, pending formal review across all 14 Commonwealth realms, warning that any deviation risked sovereign confusion and reputational commingling, which is a polite way of saying the Crown believed lines had been crossed and needed reinforcement. Within hours, Canada confirmed receipt of the request, and its Privy Council convened to assess styling privileges under its honours system, while similar reviews launched in Australia and New Zealand, signaling that this issue had expanded far beyond British tabloids and into governmental protocol. At the same time, the BBC aired investigative coverage featuring unreleased production emails from Netflix dated between April and September 2025, revealing internal concern about the use of royal-themed framing devices, including crown visuals, archival footage of Queen Elizabeth II, and references to Princess Diana, even after legal cautions had reportedly been raised. And one email warned that Buckingham Palace was watching and that royal imagery required clear licensing because exposure risk was growing. Yet producers allegedly pushed for episodes to open with Meghan Markle's first walkabout as Duchess, followed by archival crowd footage tied to Princess Diana, arguing it resonated rather than branded. And that exchange reframed the situation from misunderstanding to persistence. Legal experts describe this not as a gray zone, but as trespass, emphasizing that royal iconography is not aesthetic decoration but protected institutional property. And emboldened by the exposure, the palace issued a Royal Gazette directive stating that any implied alignment between Archewell and the monarchy would be considered unauthorized and subject to injunction. Princess Anne reinforced the message publicly, stating that charitable trusts must not be built on proximity to power, and that service must be anchored in truth rather than nostalgia. And her words circulated rapidly across media outlets, further solidifying the perception that the monarchy was drawing a moral as well as legal boundary. Then ITV aired a previously unreleased 2021 private recording of Queen Elizabeth II, in which she reflected that titles are earned, not assumed, and that the crown is a promise, not a prop. And the emotional resonance was immediate because it linked present action to past wisdom, creating a narrative arc that felt intentional rather than reactive. Inside Kensington Palace, Prince William reportedly watched the clip privately and later delivered remarks emphasizing that while birth is not chosen, behavior is. That the monarchy is not an accessory for profit, but a service bound by accountability. And no names were necessary for the message to land. Meanwhile, California authorities confirmed formal audits into Archewell's media grant disclosures from 2022 to 2024, highlighting allocations reportedly categorized simultaneously as charitable, education, and entertainment development. And those dual classifications intensified scrutiny, because regulators tend to look closely at anything that appears to straddle purpose and profit. Meghan Markle was photographed entering Archewell offices carrying a folder labeled Legacy Talks Q1 Strategy, signaling continued resolve. Yet by evening, the Archewell website went offline for maintenance, and observers noted the quiet deletion of posts that had featured her beneath portraits of Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana, imagery now central to regulatory attention. And that digital retreat suggested recalibration under pressure. Before midnight, the Royal Trademarks Office filed an emergency injunction application seeking to prevent use of phrases such as Duchess of Sussex, Windsor Legacy, and Crown Voices in commercial projects across Commonwealth nations. And the shift was unmistakable, because the monarchy was no longer reacting to headlines. It was preemptively securing language territory. As February 25th arrived, reports surfaced that Prince Harry had declined participation in a scheduled Archewell legal strategy call, and insiders interpreted it not as a scheduling conflict, but as distance growing visible. Further revelations suggested he had privately contacted Sir Jonathan Hepworth, chief legal counsel to King Charles III, seeking clarification regarding protections for his children's legacy independent of Archewell. and that move stunned observers, because it indicated strategic separation without public condemnation. Princess Catherine, attending a charity engagement, responded to questions with a measured phrase, "When the wind is loud, truth walks quietly," reinforcing the palace's calm posture, while two major UK non-profits began reviewing promotional connections linked to Archewell, and the House of Commons passed a non-binding motion commending King Charles for preserving royal integrity under strain. Momentum had clearly shifted because Archewell faced not only audits, but erosion of institutional partnerships. And as Commonwealth databases began updating references to Sussex titles, the broader implications settled in. This was not a feud, but a restructuring of how royal proximity would be defined going forward, and the next moment would bring the most personal dimension yet. By February 26th, the tension that had been building behind palace walls and across international headlines finally condensed into a single defining moment. Because at precisely 8 p.m. Greenwich time, King Charles III appeared in a pre-recorded broadcast from Sandringham House, seated alone before a fireplace once used by Queen Elizabeth II. And his tone was not combative, it was measured, almost mournful, as he spoke about safeguarding the dignity of the institution while acknowledging the unspoken weight of fatherhood, and then delivered the decision that reshaped the entire narrative, announcing that the titles Duke and Duchess of Sussex would be suspended indefinitely from all formal, public, and diplomatic usage across the Commonwealth. Not revoked, but frozen, a legal distinction that signaled both firmness and restraint. And within hours, official databases in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand reflected the adjustment, removing public-facing references to Meghan Markle's styling and reinforcing that this was coordinated, not symbolic. What resonated most was not the policy shift, but the personal undertone, as King Charles addressed Prince Harry directly, saying the door remained open not for spectacle or negotiation, but for truth, healing, and duty. And in that line, the monarchy framed the conflict not as rebellion but as divergence from responsibility, and social media surged with reactions. Yet the institutional machinery continued moving steadily rather than emotionally. Then came the response few anticipated, because just 12 hours later, CNN aired an interview with Prince Harry, filmed in Los Angeles, where he appeared subdued, reflective, and noticeably separated from the intensity that had defined earlier messaging. And he admitted that he had helped create the situation, acknowledging damage without directing blame, and distancing himself from recent legal offensives, stating there were elements he could not defend, while also refusing to condemn Meghan Markle outright, which left viewers sensing internal conflict rather than unified resistance. And most significantly, he announced a full step back from Archewell, entering what he described as a period of rehabilitation and reflection with no timeline and no media strategy attached. And that decision altered the trajectory because it introduced accountability rather than escalation. Inside the United Kingdom, Prince William and Princess Catherine released a joint statement expressing support for King Charles and committing to carry the crown's legacy forward with humility, strength, and clarity, reinforcing continuity rather than reaction. And while Meghan Markle did not immediately issue further remarks, her attorney, Elena Fitz, reiterated that the Duchess of Sussex stood by her values and would not be intimidated by coordinated legal protocol. Yet the absence of fresh messaging felt quieter than before, especially as regulatory actions continued unfolding in the background, with Ofcom launching a formal inquiry into content misrepresentation linked to prior podcast licensing, and the UK Charity Commission expanding its review of foreign donations tied to Archewell's 2024 grant program, while IRS investigators deepened their audit timeline in the United States. And these developments signaled that the story was no longer about perception, but about documentation. As night approached, the BBC released an audio clip of Queen Elizabeth II recorded in 2021, reflecting that the crown is a promise, and that promises once broken are remembered longer than crowns, a statement that felt almost prophetic in context. And Parliament responded with bipartisan commendation for King Charles, emphasizing constitutional clarity during emotional strain. And what struck many observers was not triumph, but transformation. Because the monarchy had shifted from defensive posture to strategic preservation, drawing legal, cultural, and symbolic boundaries in real time. Prince Harry now stood suspended between identities, publicly stepping back from the foundation that had once embodied his and Meghan Markle's departure narrative, while quietly seeking clarity about his children's standing within the royal framework. And that image of him, caught between loyalty and lineage, became the lasting impression, rather than any single headline. Meghan Markle faced mounting institutional withdrawal, not through spectacle, but through systematic distancing as partnerships were reviewed, digital content recalibrated, and language territories legally secured. And regardless of personal sympathies, the structural message was unmistakable. Proximity to the crown would no longer function as flexible branding currency. And as this chapter closed, the monarchy emerged altered yet reinforced, demonstrating that titles may evolve, relationships may fracture, and narratives may clash, but institutional survival rests on defined boundaries and disciplined response. And whether this suspension marks a temporary pause or a permanent pivot remains unwritten. Yet one reality now stands clear. The era of blurred lines between royalty and commerce has met its reckoning, and the consequences will echo far beyond this single February. If you want the real story behind the headlines and the power moves shaping history, make sure you're subscribed, like this video, and share your thoughts below, because the next chapter is already unfolding.